For HR to be relevant in today's world, we've got to see it about enabling our employees across the organization to do their best work. And best work doesn't just mean a good job in my defined job, it means doing something different, trying to deliberately go above and beyond.
Julian, thanks so much for being here. In HR, one of the common problems is that HR is seen as an old and stodgy industry or department in a sense. To innovate HR, what can we learn from entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so you've got to start by saying, what is it that we're trying to do to make our organizations successful? And my starting point from that is first of all, it's all about the people. And it's also all about people doing things differently. In other words, any organization can kind of follow the norms in their industry and just copy one another. But to be successful, you've got to rise above that. And the only way to do that is through people being entrepreneurial, people doing things differently. Entrepreneurial is really about pursuing new opportunities. So the starting point for me is that for HR to be relevant in today's world, we've got to see it about enabling our employees across the organization to do their best work. And best work doesn't just mean a good job in my defined job, it means doing something different, trying to deliberately go above and beyond.
So how does HR do that? Because HR has fantastic performance management systems and they say, you know, if you do your role well, then you get a thumbs up. That's probably not the way to do it.
Exactly. And of course, there's a classic distinction, isn't there, between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is all about being given rewards for doing a good job, and that means that we can define what the job is in the first place. Intrinsic motivation says that actually most people would like to do a good job in the first place if we would only let them. And most people are actually motivated by such things of having a little bit of freedom, the opportunity to learn a skill, the opportunity to do something worth doing. And so, of course, we can't completely get rid of the old traditional rules and regulations, but for the most part, our job as HR leaders is to release that inner spirit, that desire that everybody has to do a good job, which is not easy to do, but the starting point has to be that as a form of motivation.
So how do you do that? Well, on the one hand, you have a business to run and you need, continuity of the core processes. Well, on the other hand, you're also looking for kind of extra role behavior-ish.
Exactly.
How do you do that at the same time?
And of course, we've got to be honest that there's a spectrum of jobs. On the one hand, we have, hugely creative jobs. If, you're an advertising guru, right? You can do what the hell you like, excuse my language. There are other people who are working in a call center who have very, very narrowly defined jobs. So we've got to try to figure out an answer which allows us to even open up a conversation, even for people with very constrained jobs. My starting point is simple, which is that let's assume you have some sort of process for evaluating performance. We have to have the 2 or 3 or 4 objectives which somebody has to meet. But we can always define 1 or 2 additional opportunities alongside that. I think Unilever, for example, calls this your +1 objective. And what it is I'm in a conversation with you. I want you to do these things this year. But I'm going to say, look, let's talk about something you can do a bit differently. What is that +1 thing? What's that 1 or 2 extra things that you're excited about? That if it really worked, it would make a significant difference, not just to you in terms of your enjoyment of your job, but also to the company as well. And as a good leader of others, I want to support that. And I want us to actually build that into our formal process. In other words, I don't want to throw out the old. I just want to give an opportunity for something new in addition to it.
Yeah. So you see it as something going together with the old, coexisting to each other.
That's right. And of course, there's lots of different ways of doing it. There are some organizations which say, we're actually going to deliberately give you a very loose job description, and we're going to encourage you to figure out for yourself what it looks like. I mean, they say that, if you don't do your narrow job description, you get fired. But if you want to get promoted, you've got to do more than what your job description actually says. Those so-called extra role behaviors are what makes the difference. And so we've got to find a way for HR to sort of talk about that stuff in a sensible way. And then that is partly through annual reviews, but it's also through the culture that we set at the top, right? In other words, as a leader of others, what's the best way of figuring out a way of getting people to behave differently? It is to behave differently yourself. People role model themselves on your behaviors.
So tell us something about that culture that you mentioned. How do you build a culture that supports corporate entrepreneurship?
So it really, it comes down to the leader of the operating unit. And when I say an operating unit, I mean anything from 20 to 200 people. That leader has the opportunity to create a culture, a way of working within their operations that may or may not be the same as that of their parent company, if you see what I mean. And so the way that leader does that is by having a very clear sense of what they're trying to do, by deliberately role modeling the behaviors they're looking for. They want, being a bit more creative, being sort of deliberately challenging in a positive way in meetings. And then when they see people behaving in that way, they are explicitly kind of supporting that. I really loved the way that you challenged me in that meeting because it forced us to be a little bit more honest about the issues that we're working on. And sometimes I've seen people sort of bake into their meetings, explicit ways of doing that. I've seen companies, for example, that say, look, innovation requires taking some risks. Taking risks means not everything's going to work out. Therefore, we've got to be more tolerant of failure. So let us, at the beginning or the end of a meeting, have a failure discussion. In other words, let's go around the table. Each meeting, we're going to have different persons going to be talking about a project they did that did not work out. Why didn't it work out? What did we learn from it? Why this is something we should then build on. What I'm trying to say is that there are mechanisms we can put in place to institutionalize or make normal some of the behaviors that we associate with trying things differently. So that's the sort of culture that I'm looking for. That's what I'm trying to create in my own organization at London Business School. I've got a team of 120 people reporting to me. And so that's what we're trying to do.
That's fascinating. And I think that boils into the concept of what's called failing forward, failing early and then learning from it.
Exactly.
So what's the role of learning in this entire process?
Yeah, so learning is obviously something we do as individuals. And of course, it's very hard to kind of put your hands around exactly what that is, but certainly learning comes from diverse experiences and failure is part of learning as well as success. But I want to make the point that organizations also learn. In other words, organizations build new and better ways of working as a function of what has worked and what's not worked in the past. And I think we've got to see organizational learning as a sort of a two-dimensional thing. We want those individuals to get better at their jobs and more open to trying new things. But then we want the organization itself to develop routines, patterns of behavior that actually support even more of that sort of thing. So for me, if you're trying to create that innovative culture, you're trying to create a learning organization.
So you talk now about organizational learning. What's the role of the individual learner? So an HR professional is watching now, they see a digital disruption taking place. I think 5% of people need to fully reskill in the next 10 years. What's the role of individual learning in this process?
So look, ultimately an individual has to learn for themselves. We can help them, we can show what sort of activities and behaviors are supported by the organization, then we can encourage individuals to kind of figure these things out for themselves. But you're touching on an important point, which is that it doesn't just happen through experience. Learning also happens through formal education. We absolutely do need to, read and go on formal training courses, take online webinars and things. And real learning, of course, is the back and forth from doing something differently, reflecting on it, making sense of it in the context of what other people have written, and then using that insight to try new things. So we've got to be very thoughtful about the environment we create that allows people to learn by iterating between challenging work assignments on the one hand and formal learning on the other hand. That's where learning is the most powerful.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.